unfortunately, like most congregations, we're not having in-person services at the moment.
So we actually see you, so you're good.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right, so the topic is Tisha B'Av, the day to mourn, not just the destruction of the temple, but the displacement of the Jewish people, stories of destruction and resilience. I heard a little bit of Rabbi Sussman's talk, so I'll try to connect a little bit with that. And I'm going to try to make this a little bit interactive. So if you know how to use your raise hand option, there's a lot of stories about Tisha B'Av in the Talmud. And because I don't know a lot of you, I don't know how many of them you know. So if I start telling a story and you know it, and I see a bunch of hands go up, then I'm going to say you probably all know the story. So why the title? So throughout Jewish history, the hope of being restored to our independence as a people in our land and able to practice our religion in the sacred temple has been maintained in prayer and study. Narratives in particular have played a key role in keeping the dream alive. Our resilience from the past can be a guide for us in the present as we deal with issues ranging from the pandemic to the recent spate of Jew hatred coming from celebrities. Following is a summary of an article that shows the value of narrative for resilience of families. I actually used this article when it came out, or around then in a high holiday sermon because I thought it was so powerful. So this is a summary of it from 2013. And I believe we can use these same ideas for the Jewish family and not just the individual family. So it was in the Times, March 15, 2013. And here goes. The single most important thing you can do for your family may be the simplest of all. Develop a strong family narrative. Marshall Duke, a colorful psychologist at Emory University in the mid-1990s, was asked to help explore myth and ritual in American families. Quote, there was a lot of research at the time into the dissipation of the family, end quote. He said at his home in suburban Atlanta, but we were more interested in what families can do to counteract those forces. Around that time, Dr. Duke's wife, Sarah, a psychologist who worked with children with learning disabilities, noticed something about her students. The ones who know a lot about their families tend to do better when they face challenges, right? The ones who know a lot about their families tend to do better when they face challenges. Her husband was intrigued and along with a colleague, Robin Fibush, set out to test their hypothesis. They developed a measure called the quote unquote, do you know scale. They asked children to answer 20 questions. Examples included, do you know where your grandparents grew up? Do you know where your mom and dad went to high school? Do you know where your parents met, etc.? Dr. Duke and Dr. Fibush asked those questions of 4 dozen families in the summer of 2001 and taped several of their dinner table conversations. They then compared the children's results to a battery of psychological tests that children had taken and reached an overwhelming conclusion. The more children knew about their family's history, the stronger their sense of control over their lives, the higher their self-esteem, and the more successfully they believe their family functioned. The do you know scale turned out to be the best single predictor of children's emotional health and happiness. And then something unexpected happened 2 months later was September 11th. As citizens, Dr. Duke and Fibush were horrified, but as psychologists, they knew they had been given a rare opportunity. Though the families they studied had not been directly affected by the events, all the children had experienced the same national trauma at the same time. The researchers went back and reassessed the same children, the same families. Once again, Dr. Duke said, the ones who knew more about their families proved to be more resilient, meaning they could moderate the effects of stress. I'll leave the rest of that, but I think the idea is pretty clear. The more children know about their families, the better they are, better odds they have of feeling okay in the world altogether. And so, like I said at the beginning, I think we can apply this a step further in terms of the Jewish people. And the more we know about our collective family, the better off we are in terms of navigating. Last night we had 4 congregations had a service together for Tisha B'Av, and I mentioned Seth Rogen. Some of you have seen on the news, a nice Jewish boy, a comedian. I don't know that much about him, but apparently he said on a podcast that that he'd been sold a bunch of lies about Israel, and if he had known that there had been people there before the Jews settled there, my assumption is he meant coming after the Holocaust, even though there were Jews there before, then he would have had different opinions. He later backtracked and said he was only kidding. I don't know if he was kidding or not. I didn't listen to the podcast, and I don't feel the need to. But it was a very good indication of somebody who's Jewish who set a firestorm by saying something about, I mean, I don't know who was teaching him, but I certainly haven't taught that there weren't people in Israel before. Many great, and sometimes you have it the other way around. Everything was great, and then the stock market crashed, or somebody died, and everything is terrible. We have this constant up and down. So it's known as an oscillating narrative. But Tisha B'Av is the designated day to focus on the downs. Even so, it is important to remember on Tisha B'Av that despite these many atrocities, we have survived and at times even thrived. In the Mishnah Ta'anit, fasting, that follows, we see mention of some of these events. I also brought in a list from Wikipedia, which some of the other rabbis may have mentioned. I know Rabbi Sussman was talking about the book burning in Paris event. Unfortunately, it is far from an exhaustive list. I follow it with brief excerpts from Lamentation and Jeremiah, both books from the Hebrew Bible that deal with the destruction of Jerusalem, and then some readings from the Talmud, the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, Nero Caesar, the wealthy woman, Yochanan ben Zakkai, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Rabbi Akiva, the mourners of Zion, and Onias and his temple in Egypt. I'll also talk a little bit about Napoleon. And finally, if there's time, Hannah Senesh as well. So in the Mishnah Ta'anit, it says 5 things. On the 9th of Av, it was decreed that our ancestors should not enter the land. The temple was destroyed, the first and the second. Beitar was captured, and the city was plowed up. When Av enters, they limit their rejoicing, right? So 5 things happen. This is in the Mishnah. So the first and second temple's destruction is pretty obvious. We know what they're talking about. When it says that our ancestors, it was decreed that our ancestors should not enter the land, it's talking about the story of these spies, and they're coming back with a bad report about the land, and that was a precursor to this day being a day that a lot of bad things happen. And lastly, in terms of Beitar being captured, so that's the story, the Bar Kokhba revolt against the Romans that led to at least 550,000, but probably more like 1 million Jews killed. So this is the list from Wikipedia I mentioned. They got it from Or Sameach. I'm not sure exactly what its origins are. Over time, Tisha B'Av has come to be a Jewish day of mourning, not only for these events, but also for later tragedies, which occurred on or near the 9th of Av. The First Crusade officially commenced on the 24th of Av, killing 10,000 Jews in its first month and destroying Jewish communities in France and the Rhineland. The Jews were expelled from England, July 18, 2090, on the 9th of Av. The Jews were expelled from France, as Rabbi Sussman was talking about, July 22nd, 1306. On the 10th of Av, Jews were expelled from Spain, 1492. On the 7th of Av, Germany entered World War I. On the 9th of Av, 1914. And then there's another couple of references. Heinrich Himmler on the 9th of Av received approval for the final solution. On the 9th of Av began the mass deportation of Jews from the Warsaw Ghetto, as well as on the 10th of Av in 1994, the AMIA bombing the Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires. And lastly, the Israeli disengagement from Gaza began in the Gaza Strip, expelling 8,000 Jews from Gush Katif on the 10th of Av. While the Holocaust spanned a number of years, most religious communities used Tisha B'Av to mourn its 6 million Jewish victims, in addition to or instead of the secular Holocaust memorial days. So you'll find in ultra-Orthodox communities, they don't necessarily acknowledge the secular day, but on Tisha B'Av, that's included in the mourning. Okay. A descriptive reading from the canonical Book of Lamentations, also known as Echa, traditionally attributed to Jeremiah. It shows the state of events around the time of the destruction of the temple. This is the first temple. It is part of the traditional reading for this day. And this is from the 5th chapter, first verse, Echor Adonai my haya lanu. Remember, O Lord, what has befallen us. Behold and see our disgrace. Our heritage is passed to aliens, our homes to strangers. We have become orphans, fatherless, our mothers like widows. We must pay to drink our own water, obtain our own kindling at a price. We are hotly pursued, exhausted. We are given no rest. We hold out a hand to Egypt, to Assyria, for our fill of bread. Our fathers sinned and are no more, and we must bear their guilt. And it goes on, and it's just devastating. It's not having experienced personally, not having experienced anything like that. It's hard to fathom, how people survive in such circumstances. What gives them the strength to go on? All right, I'll get back to that. Second. So the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, I'm going to be brief because it's pretty well known, but I'm going to keep an eye on the participant list. If a lot of hands go up, then I'll be brief with it. So this is from the Talmud, Gittin, page 55b and 56a. Jerusalem was destroyed. Jerusalem was destroyed on account of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. This is as there was a certain man whose friend was named Kamsa and whose enemy was named Bar Kamsa. He once made a large feast and said to his servant, "Go bring me my friend Kamsa." The servant went and mistakenly brought him his enemy Bar Kamsa. The man who was hosting the feast came and found Bar Kamsa sitting at the feast. The host said to Bar Kamsa, "That man is my enemy. That is What then do you want here? I'm sorry. Arise and leave. Bar Kamsa said to him, since I've already come, let me stay. I will give you money for whatever I eat and drink. And they go back and forth, and he basically tells them, get lost. Finally, the host took Bar Kamsa by his hand, stood him up, and took him out. After having been cast out from the feast, Bar Kamsa said to himself, since the sages were sitting there and did not protest the action of the host, although they saw how he humiliated me, learn from it that they were content with what he did. Right? Shtika kada, that he was interpreting and saying the fact that they didn't protest this humiliation means that they didn't have a problem with it. I will therefore go and inform against them to the king. He went and sent to the emperor, the Jews have rebelled against you. The emperor said to him, who says that this is the case? I'm going to skip the rest of the story, but it's very easy to Google if you want, how he convinced the emperor to attack the Jews. And it's important because it's a reoccurring theme that we have, that often these tragedies result from our infighting. Now, would they have happened otherwise? Who knows? But there's often a precursor where, as Rabbi Sussman mentioned, in the case of Paris, where this person who converted away from Judaism it went to the authorities and said that the Jews are against you, the Talmud is against you. All right, so I'm going to jump here to, there were certain zealots among the people of Jerusalem. The sages said to them, let us go out and make peace with the Romans. But the zealots did not allow them to do this. So the zealots said to the sages, let us go out and engage in battle against the Roman. But the sages said to them, you will not be successful. It would be better for you to wait until the siege is broken in order to force the residents of the city to engage in battle. The zealots arose and burned down these storehouses of wheat and barley, and there was a general famine. Right, so the city was under siege and they didn't know what to do. And so one faction, known as the Zealots, said, you know what? We're going to win this by might. That's our only chance. The rabbis said, we don't stand the chance. Let's try to make peace and survive. I'm going to skip that story. The Gemara relates, Abba Sikara was the leader of the Zealots. They were known as the Biryoneh of Jerusalem, and the son of the sister of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai sent a message to him, and he said, come to me in secret. So Abba Sikara came to Rabbi Yochanan and said to him, and Rabbi Yochanan said to him, until when will you do this? Until when will you do this and kill everyone through starvation? Abba Sikara said to him, what can I do? For if I say something to them, they will kill me. Right, so this is a leader, but now he's afraid of the people he's leading. Rabbi Yochanan said to him, show me a method so that I will be able to leave the city. And it is possible that through this, there will be some small salvation. Abba Sikara said to him, this is what you should do. Pretend to be sick and have everyone come and ask about your welfare, so that word will spread about your ailing condition. Afterward, bring something putrid and place it near you, so that people will say that you have died and are decomposing. And then have your students enter to bring you to burial, and let no one else come in, so that the zealots not notice that you are still light. As the zealots know that a living person is lighter than a dead person. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai did this. Rabbi Eliezer Eliezer entered from one side, one of his students, and Rabbi Yeshua, another one from the other side, to take him out. When they arrived at the entrance of the city, the guards, these were the zealots, wanted to pierce him with their swords in order to ascertain that he was actually dead, as was common practice, apparently. Abba Sikara said to them, the Romans will say that they pierce even their teachers. The guards then wanted at least to push him to see whether he was still, in which case he would cry out on account of being pushed. Abba Sikara said to them, they will say that they push even their teachers. The guards then opened the gates and he was taken out. When Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai reached there, the Roman camp, he said, greetings to you, the king. Greetings to you, the king. Vespasian said to him, you are liable for 2 death penalties. One, because I'm not a king, and yet you call me a king. And furthermore, if I am a king, why didn't you come to me sooner? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him, as for what you said about yourself, I'm not king. Basically, he becomes the king. And there's this back and forth. And finally, the emperor gives Rabbi Yochanan the opportunity. He says, ask for 3 things you want. And instead of asking for the saving of Jerusalem, he asked to save a certain family, to bring a cure to a certain great rabbi, and to spare the city of Yavna. Right, and the Talmud talks about and kind of mocks him for not asking the obvious, which would have been to save Jerusalem. And it explains that he believed that that request wouldn't have been granted. And so he went for what he believed was attainable. Yavna then became the center of Judaism. And the Sanhedrin, the central court, was reestablished there. And there's a Mishnah in the Talmud and Rosh Hashanah that talks about one of the main debates that happened there, and it was about blowing the shofar on Shabbat. And that's a whole chapter on its own that's worth looking up. So I'm going to switch gears here and then maybe go back to some of these Talmud stories to Napoleon. So there's a story that I heard growing up. As I dug a little deeper on the internet, it seems it's a myth, but who really knows? And it goes, let me just do a quick search here. Napoleon, here we go. So it goes, basically the version that I heard was Napoleon was, for whatever reason, he's walking down the street, he hears sobbing. He says, what's going on? They say, oh, that's the synagogue. What are they sobbing for? They're sobbing for Jerusalem and for the temple. And he said, didn't that happen, ages ago? They said, yeah. So he said, a people that mourn 1,700 years later will be able to go back and rebuild their city. Another version that's found of the story is that the beginning is the same, but instead of him saying, that people are more going to end up going back, he said, why are they sitting there in mourning? He pointed to his sword and he said, that's how you reconquer a city. Right. And it's kind of fits into that narrative that we see so often between the debate of the people who want to be proactive and who want to use might versus those who either believe that it's hopeless on their own, or, yeah, and basically believe that their only hope is in God. And so prayer and mourning and all of that is the way to go. And then a really powerful story that I didn't hear growing up, but I know a lot of people did, but I think it's worth mentioning in terms of resilience. Is Hannah Senesh. In Israel, there's a lot of institutions named for her. There's also that famous song, Eli, Eli, that's from one of her poems. So Hannah Senesh was a paratrooper trained to rescue Jews during the Holocaust. Captured and killed by the Nazis, she's still a national heroine in Israel. Senesh, dressing up in a costume as a Hungarian soldier. Through her brief but noteworthy life, Senesh became a symbol of idealism. I might have missed something there. And self-sacrifice. Her poems, made famous in part because of her unfortunate death, reveal a woman imbued with hope, even in the face of adverse circumstances. So she was born in 1921, killed in 1944. She was born in Budapest, Hungary. As the daughter of an author and journalist, she demonstrated her own literary talent from an early age, and she kept a diary from age 13 until shortly before her death. Although her family was assimilated, anti-Semitic sentiment in Budapest led her to involvement in Zionist activities, and she left Hungary for Eretz Yisrael for Israel in 1939. She studied first at an agricultural school and then settled at Kibbutz Sdot Yam. While there, she wrote poetry as well as a play about kibbutz life. In 1943, Senesh joined the British Army and volunteered to be parachuted into Europe. The purpose of this operation was to help the Allied efforts in Europe and establish contact with partisan resistance fighters in an attempt to aid beleaguered Jewish communities. Senesh trained in Egypt and was one of the 33 people chosen to parachute behind enemy lines. Again, she was doing this through the British Army, with the goal of reaching her native Budapest. Senesh parachuted into Yugoslavia in March 1944 and spent 3 months with Tito's partisans. Her idealism and commitment to her cause are memorialized in her poem, "Blessed is the Match," which she wrote at that time. On June 7th, 1944, at the height of the deportation of Hungarian Jews, Senesh crossed the border into Hungary. She was caught almost immediately by the Hungarian police and tortured cruelly and repeatedly over the next several months. Despite these conditions, Senesh refused to divulge any information about her mission. Even the knowledge that her mother was at risk and that she too might be harmed did not compel Senesh to cooperate with the police. At her trial in October 1944, Senesh staunchly defended her activities and she refused to request clemency. I'm just going to repeat that again. She refused to request clemency. Throughout her ordeal, she remained steadfast in her courage. When she was executed by a firing squad on November 7th, she refused the blindfold, staring squarely at her executors and her fate. Senesh was only 23 years old. So, you know, stories like this, and there are so many from, you know, the Holocaust stories of bravery. I was reading, you know, the stories from the Warsaw Ghetto about, you know, that same push and pull again. You know, do we take a risk? You know, there's no chance of us winning. And yet people took a risk and said, you know what, we're going to die anyway. Let's at least die with valor. And it reflects that constant hope that God is going to save us, that there's a way If only we give enough charity, if only we say the right prayer, then we'll be okay. And what Judaism teaches us is that it's not that simple, and that we need to take action as well. And that's what makes these dilemmas so hard, is because often the person who's seeing things from the other perspective is actually coming from a legitimate Jewish point of view as well. And, sometimes it's really gray what the best thing to do is. It's easy in hindsight, but we're not in the middle of it. 1 second. Okay. So this is a little bit of a tangential story, but it's Rabbi Akiva that I assume most of you are at least a little bit familiar with. And it happens at the time of the Romans. So here it goes. This is from the Talmud, Makot, which means lashes, 24a. And it once was the Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar, Ben Azariah, Rabbi Yeshua, and Rabbi Akiva were walking along the road in the Roman Empire. And they heard the sound of the multitudes of Rome from, this is actually a different story, but it's worth saying as well, from Ptolemy at a distance of 120 mil, which is a length measurement. The city was so large that they were able to hear its tumult from a great distance. And the other sages began weeping, and Rabbi Akiva was laughing. They said to him, "For what reason are you laughing?" Rabbi Akiva said to them, "And you, for what reason are you weeping?" A real Jewish response. They said to him, "These Gentiles who bow to false gods and who burn incense to idols dwell securely and tranquilly in this colossal city. And for us, the house of the footstool of our God, the temple, is burnt." And the story goes on, but the message is clear that he believed in the prophecies and the faith. And so to him, even if this city would be destroyed, it confirmed the initial prophecy, which meant that the other prophecies of redemption and renewal would come true as well. Or Shimon Bar Yochai, that was the one. So this is a story about Shimon Bar Yochai. We know about him from Lag BaOmer. He's celebrated, but this is the story behind this is the story behind it. So Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon were sitting, and Rabbi Yehuda, son of convert, sat beside them. Rabbi Yehuda opened and said, "How pleasant are the actions of this nation," talking about the Romans, "as they establish marketplaces, establish bridges, and establish bathhouses." Rabbi Yossi was silent. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai responded and said, "Everything they establish only for their own purpose. They establish marketplaces to place prostitutes in them, bathhouses to pamper themselves, and bridges to collect taxes from all who pass over." So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was certainly feeling cynical that day. Yehuda, son of converts, and it's interesting that it mentions son of converts. They may have had some discomfort with converts at that time, because otherwise it's not really clear why they bring that in. So he went and related their statements to his household, and those statements continued to spread until they were heard by the monarchy. They ruled and said, Yehuda, who elevated the Roman regime, the one who told us basically, shall be elevated and appointed as head of the sages, the head of the speakers in every place. Yossi, who remained silent, shall be exiled from his home in Judea as punishment and sent to the city of Zippori in the Galilee. And Shimon, who denounced the government, shall be killed. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai and his son Rabbi Eliezer went and hid in the study hall. Every day Reb Shimon's wife would bring them bread and a jug of water, and they would eat. When the decree intensified, Reb Shimon said to his son, women are easily impressionable, and therefore there is room for concern, lest the authorities torture her and she reveal our whereabouts. I imagine some women being a little uncomfortable with that statement, but that's what it says. They went and they hid in a cave without telling his wife where they were. A miracle occurred and a carob tree was created for them, as well as a spring of water. They would remove their clothes and sit covered in sand up to their necks. They would study Torah all day in that manner. At the time of prayer, they would dress, cover themselves, and pray, and they would again remove their clothes afterwards so that they would not become tattered. They sat in the cave for 12 years. Elijah the prophet came and stood at the entrance of the cave and said, who will inform Bar Yochai that the emperor died and his decree has been abrogated? They emerged from the cave and saw people who were plowing and sowing. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai said, these people abandon eternal life of Torah study and engage in temporal life for their own sustenance. So he had just spent 12 years studying in a cave, and now he's judging the people who are trying to make a living. The Gemara relates that every place that Rabbi Shimon and his son, Rabbi Eliezer, directed their eyes was immediately burned. A divine voice emerged and said to them, did you emerge from the cave in order to destroy my world? Return to your cave. They again went and sat there for 12 months. They said, the judgment of the wicked in Gehenna lasts for 12 months. Surely their sin was atoned in that time. A divine voice emerged and said to them, emerge from your cave. They emerged. Everywhere that Rabbi Eliezer would strike, so this was the son, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon would heal. Rabbi Shimon said to Rabbi Eliezer, my son, you and I suffice for the entire world as the two of us are engaged in the proper study of Torah. Right, and so on the one hand, he studied Torah. On the other hand, it seems like he got a little bit arrogant. As the sun was setting on Shabbat Eve, they saw an elderly man who was holding 2 bundles of myrtle branches and running at twilight. They said to him, why do you have these? He said to them, in honor of Shabbat. They said to him, and let one suffice. He answered, one is corresponding to remember the Shabbat day, to keep it holy, and one is corresponding to observe the Shabbat day to keep it holy. The 2 ways that it's given in the Aseret to do it. Rabbi Shimon said to his son, see how beloved the mitzvot are to Israel? Their minds were put at ease, and they were no longer as upset that people were not engaged in Torah study. And the story goes on, and these, Rav Shimon Bar Yochai was a complicated character, as you can tell. How true the story is, that he's walking around and somehow he looks at something and it gets zapped and and gets lit on fire. How literally we're supposed to take these stories, it is up to you. But it certainly seems like a lot of these stories are embellished at the very least. But the connection, so the connection I wanted to bring that story as well is because it's talking about the Romans and the discomfort that the Jews had with their relationship with them. And at different times, there was either a tolerable relationship or even occasionally a decent relationship, and other times a horrible relationship. And there were many sects within the Jewish community who had different agendas. Like I mentioned before, there were the Zealots, as well as a whole host of other sects. Let me see what else, but maybe I'll take questions now. Any questions or comments? Okay.
Oh, Rabbi, I have one question for you.
Sure. Hold on a second. Let me put them back. Yes. Hi.
Hi. So the 3 weeks, does it mark the destruction of the first temple or the second temple?
Neither. It marks, so I probably should have read the first part of the Mishnah. Hold on. I was trying to be brief.
That's okay.
Find it in a second here. So the Mishnah actually started with, there were 5 events that happened to our ancestors on the 17th of Tammuz, right? Which is the beginning of the 3 weeks, and 5 on the 9th of Av. On the 17th of Tammuz, the tablets were shattered, the Tamid, the daily offering, was canceled, the daily offering in the temple. The walls of the city were breached, and that's the main thing, right? And so it's not that neither of the temples were destroyed. There is some question in terms of the temples, whether it was exactly on the 9th or maybe the 10th or the 8th, but that's generally what we're commemorating.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep.
Rabbi, it's Jack Bender. Can you hear me?
Hey, Jack.
Hi. It's about Hannah Senish. And my question is, my grandchildren went to the school of her that named after her in Brooklyn, so I'm pretty aware of the story. And at the end, when she was offered clemency, wouldn't it have been really a better thing to accept it and do more for the people than to have been executed? I mean, I'm just wondering about all that, the martyring. And basically, she was dead. And her life could have given so much more. And it's sort of sad on that level if she was offered that opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and one can also ask the question in terms of Jewish law, is it acceptable? I mean, she was secular, so that wasn't really a big concern for her. My assumption is that she hoped that this would shock people. You know, there was a constant disbelief that such civilized people, the Germans and all of that, can really stoop so low. And my assumption is that she was hoping maybe when people saw a 23-year-old being executed looking straight at them, that they would think maybe we've gone too far.
Well, didn't seem to happen like that.
Well, yeah, and you know, it's always easier to look back. Or she was so convinced that she wouldn't get clemency, kind of like Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, right? He should have asked for saving Jerusalem. He was given a chance. Make a wish.
Okay. It's always disturbing when people die.
Yeah.
I don't know. Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Rabbi?
Hey.
Hi, thank you for a wonderful presentation, as always. I just wanted to share that I had stayed at Sdot Yam for 5 months when I was working on my kibbutz. And I just wanted to reiterate, in spite of what Jack just said, and I understand Jack's point, she really is a true hero. We learned all about her life. There's a Hannah Senish house where you can visit on the kibbutz today that celebrates her life and what she had done. And she really is a national hero, and she continues to be an inspiration to many people. So I just wanted to throw that out there, having lived there during that time, she was a very big inspiration to me living there and to all the people that are on the kibbutz, and then, of course, throughout Israel.
So what I hear you saying is that her actions and arguably her courage actually continues to have an impact.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Otherwise, you're going to hear more stories. All right, let me see what else I have here.
Rabbi, I had a question.
Sure.
David, hi, how are you? Yes. So, how come this morning minyan we don't wear talis or wrap tefillin, yet we do it later here for the Mincha Mariv service? It's very unusual. So I thought you could explain that.
Yeah, so this observance has always been ambivalent. There's always been, and I talked a little bit about this. I can't even remember yesterday or in the class we had on Sunday, probably both. Trying to strike the right balance between, life goes on and the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple was so catastrophic and so cataclysmic and so devastating that everything else is meaningless. Like the mourners of Zion, that group. And then we also have the challenge, which is we actually are in Israel now. We do have, to a large extent, sovereignty in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is rebuilt in many ways. And some people have argued that we shouldn't have Tisha B'Av at all anymore, right? That the whole point is we've been begging to go back, and now we have it. And there's been proposals to, cut the fast in half, and different ways of acknowledging, or even, I know in some modern Sidurim, the text is changed to acknowledge that reality, because otherwise it just can feel outdated or inauthentic. So that's a reflection of some of that disagreement and trying to strike the right balance.
Thanks. I was thinking before when you told the anecdotes about Napoleon, I recall having read, I don't know if this is so or not, but notwithstanding all his conquering and all the plundering, that when, and at least in Italy, when they actually conquered, the Austrians, I think, were in charge there. And he went through Italy, and he opened the ghetto gates to the different towns to allow Jews to practice. So I don't know how much of that is so, or just,
No, you're absolutely right, and he did that in other places as well. And then he got tremendous backlash from the anti-Semites all over the place. And so he backtracked to some degree. And then he again started pushing. Now, what his motive was is debatable. In one place, it seems like his motive was at least partially financial, because he believed that Jews were better at business. But it seems like he genuinely believed in the concept of the French Revolution, of equality and liberty, and he said, "What's going on here? I mean, we're doing this or we're not." Kind of a little bit like the reckoning we're having in this country, to a different, to a different extent, but the idea is similar. And he actually convened, a little bit similar to what Rabbi Sussman was talking about in France earlier, where they, challenged the rabbis to a debate. He called the leaders of the Jewish communities that he had under his control. It was over 100, and I don't know if he called it the Sanhedrin or if others came to see it that way, but he essentially said, listen, I'm trying to free you guys and to give you rights, but these people are coming with all these complaints against you. So let's convene, and I want you to defend yourselves against these accusations, and I want you to tell me how you're going to remedy them. And if you can do that, I am happy to give you guys absolutely free rights. You pay the same amount of taxes as everybody else. You can work in the same professions as everybody else. And it got derailed to some extent, but there were clearly a lot more freedoms that the Jews had, as well as, a lot of the rabbis were also afraid of the Jews getting the freedoms because they were afraid they were going to assimilate. And so they were in this sort of weird position where on the one hand, it's like we're being redeemed and we're being given mercy. And at the same time, they were afraid that with the changes, and people going out of the shtetl, that there would be assimilation. And we just to a large extent, that's true. But ultimately, Judaism needs to stand in the real world and not just in the shtetl. Anybody else?
We have time for about another question or so. I know Rabbi Harold has joined us, and we will start at 3 o'clock on the dot.
All right, so the wealthy woman buys me a couple of minutes. Wealthy woman. So the Roman authorities laid siege on Jerusalem for 3 years. They were at that time in Jerusalem, there were 3 wealthy people, and they gave from their storehouses. And that's how people were able to stay alive. And then there was this particular woman named Marta bat Betos. She was known as one of the wealthy women of Jerusalem. She sent out her agent and said to him, go and bring me fine flour. He went, there was no fine flour. She said, go and bring me less fine flour. Back and forth she goes. By the time he gets there, there's none left. So once again, all right. So she says, I will go out myself and see if I can find something to eat. She stepped on some dung, or another version is she ate a particular fruit and she died. And this is just one of the stories that's told in the Talmud about that time of the siege. Of here was this wealthy woman, and ultimately she was reduced to nothing because the siege had, when the zealots burned all the storehouses, even though she had the money, there was nothing to buy. So not a very happy story to end on, but Tisha B'Av is not a happy time. It's a time where we remember these stories.
Thank you so
Okay,
much,
that's-
Rabbi
That's
Castel.
correct.
What's that?
That's correct.
Absolutely.
That was great. Thank you. I appreciate that. Rabbi, if you can just make me the host or Rabbi Howell the host before you
Um,
sign off.
Let me figure out how to do that, and I'll be happy
I think
to.
you just click on my name under participants. You can
Yeah.
just press on host.
Got it. Make host.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much for the stories, for your time. You know, 3 different rabbis so far, 3 different topics, 3 different perspectives. Thank you again. And I'd like to welcome Rabbi Howell. Are you there, Rabbi Howell?
I'm here. Can everybody
Great.
hear me?
Yes.
I
I'm
hope
just going to
so.
make you the host. 1 second.
Good.